Welcome everyone to this edition of HappierMe Live. I'm Dr. Manoj Krishna, the founder of HappierMe. I used to be a spine surgeon before I left medicine to start this project. Our mission is to help people lead happier lives, reduce suffering in the world, and make it better. And a special welcome to Steve Phillip, my friend, for this event, because, we all want to be happy, but we look for that happiness through our achievements, our relationships, buying things, and our experiences. But if we don't get what we want, we get stressed. And even if we do, the pleasure from that is short-lived and we need to chase something. So perhaps what we're all looking for really is a feeling of peace. And to explore how we can find this peace in ourselves, I'm joined by Steve Phillip, who's been a mental health advocate and founder of the Jordan Legacy and a friend for a long time. So Steve, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Manoj, and I really appreciate you inviting me along for this conversation today. We're no stranger to each other over the last couple of years since we first met. For anyone that isn't familiar with myself, as Manoj says, I operate as a mental health and suicide prevention advocate, having founded the Jordan Legacy as a registered community interest company in 2020. And that was just several months after, very sadly, losing my son Jordan to suicide, who was aged 34 at the time, in December of 2019. What I think today is really important is I think it's exploring an avenue that we don't look at closely enough. We often look at crisis intervention and other very practical means of supporting people. I'm not convinced we have this conversation enough. So that's why I'm really looking forward to today. So thank you for the opportunity for me to come along and join you today.
Thank you, Steve. Yes. So today's conversation is all about working upstream and being proactive to protect our mental health. And we're going to be exploring how we can do that. So Steve and I are going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we'd love your comments in the chat as we go, and we will mention them in the conversation as we travel. So please do that. And at the end of that, I would love for you to share your perspectives. Remember, this is a conversation, and we want all of you to participate so that in the end, we can create a capsule that will help many more people than are in this room. So Steve, let me begin with my first question. We don't really live in peace with ourselves. All the stats suggest we don't, right?
Yeah. Well, I think my wife has been looking at me the last few days with the amount of stress I've been displaying with certain things I'm trying to juggle and work on. I think we don't. Yeah, you're right. We don't always live in peace with ourselves. We've got 70 to 80% of the population who experience, some form of moderate to severe stress. We've got addictions running at 15% of the population. We've got 29% of teens with poor mental health. So I could go on and on and on and quote statistics. And if you consider, in the work that we do at the Jordan Legacy about what leads someone to consider suicide, it's often a combination of factors. Sometimes it can be biological and mental health issues, but they're not the main factors and drivers. Quite often they are social and psychological stresses and other health issues caused by those stresses, quite often that lead us to, or lead some people very tragically to consider that they feel so trapped that it's hopeless and the only solution is to end their lives. So yes. I don't think we're good. I don't think we're good at living in peace with ourselves at all.
I think because we don't live in peace with ourselves, then we struggle to live in peace with others. Mm-hmm. So it spills over into relationship conflict. And we know about half our relationships are unhappy. And if you judge that by the divorce statistics that we have. But even for young people, 29% of teens have poor mental health, as you said, and 22% think of suicide. So all in all, it's a huge number. And the work we're doing is about proactively trying to help people build this peace in themselves so that we can then weather the storms of life. And my mission, is that if I could live in peace with myself, then there's a bigger chance I can live in peace with others. And then maybe we could have a bit more peace in the world. That's the big dream. Let's see.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping to learn from you as well today, Manoj. So if I can take some of that away as well, that would be massive for me, really.
So what are the benefits, do you think, Steve, of investing because it does require investment, right? Investing our time and energy into building this peace in ourselves. What could be the possible benefits of that?
Okay, I'm going to start by suggesting that we're not particularly good. I'm using the royal we here, of course, so let me point the direct fingers at myself here. I don't think we're particularly good at investing time in ourselves in this respect at all. But so to some degree, I'm going to imagine this, but having spoken to people that I know do, firstly, you're going to be happier. Now, people say, what is happiness? That's the eternal question, isn't it, really? What does that mean to people? But I think we make more of our lives generally, and live our lives rather than just go through a process that many of us do every single day. I think many of the chronic illnesses, physical illnesses that we experience would be fewer
Yes.
if we had
We'd live
less
longer, wouldn't
stress.
we, Steve? I think we'd
Yeah,
live longer. Our
yeah,
relationships would be better. We'd be less reactive, maybe. And I
yeah,
also think
definitely. Yeah.
if we lived in peace with ourselves, we wouldn't need to fill that hole in ourselves with buying things all the time. And it might be good for the planet too, you know? Um,
Yeah, I think right. Well, look, I've got a question for you then, Manoj. Really, then we talk about finding peace in our lives. How do we go about that?
so maybe the first step is to realize the importance of that, right? The importance of that to protect our mental health, to strengthen our relationships, be happier in the world. And this is important not just for our mental health, but also for our physical health. All the research is showing that if you have a calm mind, you will live longer and you will have a healthier, longer life. And I had so many patients when I was a surgeon who were dying of cancer. And at the end, they say, Doc, can you give me a week? I just need a day. What can you do to give me another few hours or whatever of life? I remember one patient particularly, young man. And so I feel this way, by investing proactively, like just as we go to the gym to look after our physical health, this is something we need to do, all of us, for looking after our mental health. And Simon's saying we need to take responsibility for our own happiness, which is really important. Yes. And Ollie said to accept that pain and joy are two sides of the same coin. Let's explore that in a bit more detail, Ollie. But yes, that's you've got a point there. So I think the answer lies inside us, Steve, doesn't it? It's not outside. We've learned that. And it requires an inner journey, right? What do you think?
Yeah. And I think it is about an inner journey. And I suppose my question is, how do we begin
Yes.
that journey, really, Manoj?
I think we need to look at 2-year-olds, to learn from them. See how curious they are about everything. And just as we need to almost rediscover that curiosity for ourselves, not just about the world around us, but about what's happening inside. And to ask a simple question: what gets in the way of living with peace in ourselves? We all want it, but just wanting it isn't enough. We need to figure out what gets in the way of living with that peace and what's happening in our own mind without judging ourselves as good or bad. I think those are the three key elements of this inner journey: curiosity, accepting ourselves as we are without judging ourselves as good or bad, and this having this mind that's just open to learning. You know how when we're younger, our minds are so open to learning, and as we get older, they become more and more closed, because we think we know everything, right?
Do you think we get sort of a bit uncomfortable looking at ourselves sometimes? And some people have maybe never even considered that that's probably where we need to start. I mean, how do we get
Yes.
past that, do you think?
Yes. My mom used to tell me, when I wrote my first book, Understanding Me, Understanding You, she was still alive. And she said, Manoj, I know how to look at myself in the mirror, but this looking at yourself on the inside, that's like, what does that even mean? So for a lot of people, it's a very foreign language that
Maybe
we
that's
need.
the next piece of maybe that's the next piece of technology that needs to be invented,
Yes.
Mano. It's the internal mirror,
How
perhaps.
do
Yeah.
you look at yourself? So I think it's as simple as looking at your own hand. And we don't say it's a good hand or a bad hand. We just say it's a hand and it's got all these wonderful functions, and and we start learning. We're looking and learning. And the more we look and learn, now I'll give you another analogy of the heart. I have a great friend of mine who's a cardiologist. And we've spent now the best part of 100 years understanding what happens to the heart. The more we've studied it, the more we've been able to discover ways to prevent problems before they start and treat them better. Similarly, if we're curious about our own mind and on the spirit of learning, we can discover so many things that can protect our mental health and help us bounce back more quickly, if you like, from challenges, right?
Okay. So in terms of feeling at peace with ourselves, what do you think gets in the way of that?
Okay, so there are many, many things, but we're going to explore four or five things together. Um, so let's start with stress. Now, our mind assumes stress comes from the outside, but actually it comes from the automatic way our mind reacts to whatever's happening on the outside. But because we don't see that reaction, we think it's the traffic jam that's creating our stress. But the person next to us may not be stressed at all. So it's the way our mind reacts that creates our own stress. And it's a difference between how things are and how we want them to be. So if we can, for example, accept things as they are, you know, what the president of the United States is doing, for example, then our stress can dissolve because it's outside our zone of control. And of course, Steve, you were talking about family interactions and so on. What do you think about stress?
Yeah, firstly, I think we've got to recognise stress is not a mental health illness, of course. Or it's a natural way the body responds to any kind of pressure put upon it, and stress can actually, in many situations, be really good for us. It allows us to respond in a way that allows us to
Yes.
perform in our jobs, in our lives, in sports, or whatever it may be, in our very early human days to run away from that beast that wanted to eat us. Um, so a lot of stress can be really good. It's when stress becomes something that has knock-on effects, stops you sleeping, means you turn to addictions and other things like that. But I think, everything from it can affect our family interactions. If we're feeling stressed, we start to take it out on our spouse, our children, our friends. And I'd like to, I know you and I were having a conversation about this the other day, weren't you? That I think sometimes what happens is we carry these individual stresses as if we're putting them into a jar. An analogy I once heard related to something different. And by the end of the week, we've got this enormous jar filled with fairly heavy pebbles and stones that are all the stresses we've accumulated. And the problem is, we don't have a way often to empty that jar until one day the bottom falls out of it, of
Yes.
course. So
Yes.
I think we do need to find better ways of managing stress, because accumulative stress eventually leads to anxiety, can lead to depression and other mental health illnesses.
Yes. So because most people think the thing on the outside isn't changing, so my stress doesn't change. And it builds up, as you said, leading to addictive habits. And in acute cases, it leads to thoughts of self-harm, and in extreme cases, suicide. But just learning about the fact that it's your reaction that's creating the stress allows us then to say, hey, where does that reaction come from? And then the more you learn about your own mind, the more agency you have to respond in a way that's calmer and more, with a clear mind. So that's stress. Now, the second thing to talk about, which really disrupts our sense of peace, is anxiety. About 40% of people carry this feeling of anxiety around the world. It varies according to age group and so on. But again, our mind assumes anxiety comes from the outside, but it's just our mind imagining the worst case scenario and trying to protect itself. And many of the things we imagine, of course, never come to pass. So even if they do, our ability to meet them and deal with them is much better than we imagine that to be. For example,
Well, I
most
think
people manage to get over things like you have, right? I mean, just imagine what you've been through, Steve.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think we talk a lot in the space we work in about post-traumatic stress disorder, but then we talk about post-traumatic growth and how many of us have been through, as you say, pretty life-changing events for us, and yet we still survived and carried on. And I think for most people, you're absolutely right. And interesting on the statistics, I've heard numbers that say that more than 80% of the population have some form of anxiety disorder in the UK, and generalized anxiety disorder being the highest in that respect. But you're right to say that this anxiety is different to stress insofar as it's worrying about things that haven't happened to us yet. And I
Yes.
think this is kind of the odd thing, isn't it, really? Because why are we worrying about things that haven't happened? Why are we catastrophizing about something that may have a very different outcome if we just learn to control the processes that may have led up to that
Yes.
event, or even the thinking behind that? So, I do think that this is where having a better way of controlling our thought process is really important, to reduce anxiety,
Yes.
because anxiety that continues for a period of, as you know, for 2 weeks or longer, is then considered clinical anxiety, and therefore a mental health illness.
Yes. And I think here what we're saying is just the looking and learning about our own mind does the work of bringing that understanding and change. So you don't really have to do anything. I mean, for example, take an anxious person and say, why don't you be less anxious? And they don't know how to, you see, because they're not aware of those hidden
Sorry,
patterns.
I'm just gonna interrupt a moment, Manoj. Could I ask somebody if they've got their microphones on, just to ensure you're on mute at the moment, please? I don't think we have a way, unless you do, Manoj, of just muting anyone you can see.
I'm
But just to
sure if
check
we
we're
ask people nicely,
we're all on mute.
they'll
Thank
just do
you.
that, Steve. Thank you. Yes. But
It's
I'm
the
just
joys of
saying that
Zoom meeting.
just the ability to notice what our mind is doing brings its own freedom, is what I mean. But if you don't have that understanding of what's happening behind the curtain, if it's, for example, then you're at the mercy of what's happening in your own mind. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about, particularly something that affects a lot of young people, is our need for external validation. Because our mind is always looking out there for something to make us feel good on the inside. And we want others to like us before we like ourselves. And social media amplifies that, as you know, in a huge way. And this can cause this perpetual sense of unease in ourselves, which again drives all the negative behaviors downstream. And for a lot of young people, it's the beginning of their journey to self-harm and so on, right?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Manoj. I think I attended a really interesting event hosted by the Molly Rose Foundation, and many people on this call will be very familiar with Ian Russell and his campaign, having lost his daughter Molly, as a result of harmful content shared online, on one of the social media sites. And it was a really hard event to attend, because some of the information shared was, at a depth that I hadn't heard, and wasn't aware of before. But one of the things that continually came across through all the various forms of self-harm and what's happening was this need for young people to feel validated, the lack of self-worth that led them to congregate in communities that, had they not been available, they would never have congregated in. So I do think that self-worth is a really, really important part of this
Yes.
process,
Yes.
and understanding how to think better of ourselves is really
Yes.
important.
If your mind is looking outside for validation, then you're giving others the keys to your own well-being and happiness, right?
Good point.
And maybe we need to value things in ourselves that are not linked to prestige and achievement and money and fame and all of those things. It's things like integrity, courage, kindness, a sense of caring for others. I met a 50-year-old man who said to me, "My life's a failure." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because I haven't got a car and a house and a wife and kids and all the things that he society had conditioned him to think led to a sense of success." But just this realization of what your mind is doing and it's not serving you is the beginning of freedom from that whole trap, if you like, right, of looking outside for validation all the time.
Yeah, I really agree. I think there's some hope in all this as well, man, because I do, through the conversations I have with a lot of younger people, particularly those categorized as Gen Z now, and Gen Alpha, that they are taking a very different viewpoint to life, now, in terms of the planet and other things, and even moving away in many cases from social media, and smartphones. So I think we have some hope for the future. But I do think, so many of us, and it's not just the young people, are so easily conditioned, by what we see externally, And I think, I, for one, to take away a learning from today would be to say, how do we get better at preventing that outside interference from determining how we respond and behave?
Yes, because unconscious, and all these things we're talking about, by the way, we're not aware of. This is what our mind is doing to us. It's a famous Gabor Mate saying. But the other one is comparison. Our mind's comparing all the time, but we're not aware of it. And the story that really comes to mind is a friend of mine, Joey Polaro. He won't mind me talking about it, but we did a podcast together. He says when he was 13, he felt less than others. He had a happy family and all that. But the only way he could numb that pain was to start drinking. But that drink took him for 30 years. He was an addict. He says, short of killing people, I did everything that addicts do. And it starts really from not knowing why you're feeling what you're feeling and how to process it and how to manage and deal with those feelings. Right? And so to numb that and cope better, this is all that things we do. So, and of course, social media, as you just said, is a great example of how this unconscious process of comparison is driving so much heartache in the world, right?
Okay. And you've talked about expectations as well. I think
Yes.
there'll be probably many people on this call have, high expectations of themselves as a parent, as a sibling, as a son, a daughter, as a work colleague, an employee, whatever that might be, that they do in life. And I think there is a pressure and an expectation on us all to achieve more in life. Again, somewhat perpetuated by what we see others
Yes.
achieving in life. Is kind of a vicious circle, really. So, yeah, and I've probably seen kind of many examples of this myself. I'm trying to bring a story to mind on this hot, sultry afternoon that's kind of escaped my memory. But I suppose one of the key question for me really here, I suppose, Manoj, is why is our mind always looking outside then, to find something that makes us feel good on the inside?
Now, Steve, that's such a fantastic question, right? And we never really
I'm
ask
glad
that
I've asked one.
question.
Good.
Yeah, and we rarely ask that question of ourselves. Why is my mind looking out there for external validation, for achievement, for fame, for, experiences? But what's going on? Why are we not content on the inside? And maybe, and this is something for everyone to reflect on themselves, but maybe inside us is this deeper restlessness. Now, some people call it emptiness, some call it the void, but it drives so much of our behavior. It's also behind our feelings of loneliness which affect 60% of us. And I think the key to peace, if we drill it all the way down to what's the nub of the whole thing, is to see this restlessness in ourselves and understand that many different ways it shapes our lives. It makes us look for so many things on the outside. If we don't get what we want, then the stress and frustration and all that builds up. And a 13-year-old girl taught me this, Steve. So I said to her, I was working in schools for a long time before I started HappierMe. I said, so now you've understood this feeling of restlessness in yourself. What's the answer? How do we deal with that? And she was quiet for a long time. Nobody had ever asked her that question before. And it's like a light went on in her mind. And she said, if I stay with it, it goes away. So that's the beauty. And I think we had a comment on that, the sitting with discomfort, the ability to sit with this feeling without naming it, without judging it, just sitting with it, using your breath. And there's plenty of breathing exercises in the app and all of that we can talk about. But tuning into the sensation of something, whether it's stress or anxiety or this feeling of restlessness, and just being with it simply without thinking. Now, that's not easy for us. It's not something we've learned. But then something beautiful happens, and it dissolves into a feeling of peace.
Right. I'm going to sound like a real Luddite now, Manoj, but I'm going to represent others like me. Let's just say that this thinking, okay, so I've got to sit with this discomfort. I don't really understand what that means. What does it mean to sit
Okay,
with that?
all right.
Am I just going to wait for it to go away, or what does that
Okay,
mean?
I'll tell you. So just use a simple breathing exercise. Breathe into a count of 4, hold it, count of 2, breathe out slowly to a count of 6. And it's a slow breathing out that calms your nervous system and allows you to sit with any discomfort. That's the first thing to do. Then let's go back one. To learn this skill of looking at something without naming it, all right, start with a flower or a leaf. So I'll show you this example. I was talking to some kids at Northumbria University, some university students. I showed them a picture of a rose and I said, "What do you see?" And they all put their hands up. It's a rose. I said, "Okay, now I want you to see the same picture and not name it. And just look at the play of light and shadow and just keep looking." And then this girl from Dublin put her hand up and she said, "I don't know what you did there, but my mind went really quiet. And I started feeling really at peace inside." And this was
Okay.
an untrained
Okay.
20-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
who this word inner journey and all this feels like really gobbledygook for them. But this was so it's a real skill that we can all build. Begin with nature, begin with looking at a tree and notice the thoughts coming up and just let them come and then put them to one side and keep looking. And the more you look, the quieter your mind becomes. And if you can train your mind to do that with nature, then when an emotion rises, start with simple things like hunger, you know, uh, whatever it might be, or a headache, whatever it is you feel. But then you can start with small emotions and then build up that skill to big emotions. But if you can stay with something with the discomfort, you
Right.
have to test it for yourself and see the miracle of that. It dissolves into a feeling of peace.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then,
Actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, I've also learned is when I'm feeling hungry, breathe first, don't open the fridge. So that's probably another lesson I'm taking away. But no, that does make a lot of sense, and I get that. Thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
no, 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 I think it's beautiful. And then, the beauty of it is you can carry that peace with you and you can tune into it anytime. So when there's a storm raging on the outside, you can tune in and find that peace on the inside because you worked at it. It's yours. All of us carry that sense of peace in ourselves where our mind is quiet, which is like a shelter from the storms of life. And it's a beautiful skill we can all develop. But it begins with the simple thing, learning about ourselves, asking what gets in the way of living with this sense of peace. If people leave with just one simple takeaway, which is this peace is not out there, it's on the inside. And it requires, an inner journey to find it. And what we've built inside Happier Me is really the toolkit to help people on a practical basis do all of that. And you can look at our website, it's happierme.app, or download the app. And I'm not going to talk any more about that. Okay, shall we open it up, Steve, for a conversation? And
I will absolutely, and I will just give a minute. I know you don't want to plug the app particularly today. That's not what today was about. But having experienced the app myself and the great level of learning that's available for teens and adults, I'll just second your comment to suggesting everyone just goes and takes a look at the app at happierme.app. But yes, let's open up the conversation.
okay, I'm going to begin with my friend Sanjay, who comes to all my conversations. So, Sanjay, do you want to get the ball rolling? What do you think about living with peace? Sanjay is a pediatrician.
Thanks, Manoj. Yeah, thanks a lot, Manoj, and thanks, Steve, for a really illuminating discussion. Just a few thoughts came to mind, and at the risk of kind of repetition, I'd just like to, I suppose, say three things. One is that I think in the chat as well, there's been some question about what is this sort of sitting with and being with. I think the first thing is one's basic needs, biological needs, need to be met.
Hmm.
So, if you cannot sit with something if you are hungry, if you are kind of, have a full bladder, if you're in pain, if you're anxious. So I think those are the issues that probably need to be addressed at the beginning. And then I think it is a question of, and I come to this with a background of being a teacher of mindfulness. So a lot of the language that I'm using is probably from that kind of literature and that ancient wisdom, which is backed up by modern science now. And that is about the art of noticing when something is different, something is uneasy, something is uncomfortable. And you stay with it, just like Manoj just said. You actually sit with it, you stand with it, you be with it, and just notice what is actually happening to it. And people said something about what gets in the way. I think what gets in the way is, and I've experienced this, justification, comparison, condemnation. I think condemnation is a very, very, it's like almost endemic within the human race to be self-critical and condemning ourselves. And I think the other thing that really gets in the way is lack of self-compassion. So we really feel we ought to do better, we ought to be better, we ought to, I think somebody mentioned something about being a better version of ourselves. And I think this language is kind of unhelpful because it kind of gives us the message internally that there is something lacking and something missing within ourselves. And actually, there isn't. How do we do this? I think there is no shortcut but to practice. Just like we go to the gym to train our muscles, you have to practice stillness, you have to practice silence, you have to practice quietude. Thank you.
Thank you. So you mentioned something beautiful, Sanjay, which is self-compassion. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, thank you. As a colleague who spoke earlier, I spent about 35 years managing chronic anxiety with alcohol because I knew no better. I sorted out the alcohol problem and then looked to work out what the hell was going on. And I'm very much of the opinion that you need to find the peace on the inside.
Yes.
And you need to be very active about that. And one of the ways that I did that, because I mean, in the first thing, it's that awareness thing.
Yes.
I need to be aware of who I am, what I'm feeling. And if I don't like it, and I've got a phrase, I put it up there, it's F this S. You can work out what the words are. I would refuse, absolutely refuse to deal with the emotion, the discomfort, or whatever else that I didn't like. And I would look for what I perceived to be the healthy option. But firstly, just being aware that I wasn't happy with something was a really good way to start that healing. What I did and what I teach, I created an avatar, the avatar that I wished to be.
Mm-hmm.
That was an avatar who made the choices that I wanted to make, who behaved the way that I wanted to behave, who wore the clothes I wanted to wear, who had all of those characteristics. And in my case, it was some kind of steampunk samurai character. I love the discipline of Bushido. I love the costumes of steampunk and merging the whole thing together. And what I did when I met situations that I wasn't comfortable with or I wasn't sure how to act, I was, how would my avatar act? Yeah.
Right.
And I look at that and I would then act in that way. Now it takes a little bit of time. You've got to realize that you don't have to react, you can respond. And there's a gap between a trigger and a behavior with a response. So I would do that. And over a period of time, the avatar and me got closer and closer and closer and closer together. So and for me, it was a fantastic way to work. And I now use it with the people that I'm working with, and it's producing a really great reaction because it allows you to take responsibility for who you are, what you're feeling, how you're behaving. It also gives you the satisfaction of self-discipline. And discipline is an amazing reward for behaviors. And the more you do that, the more peace you find on the inside, and the less reliance you are on anything that's outside, so that you then, everything that comes up, don't get me wrong, I'm sure I'm going to trip over at some point, but right now I'm managing and I'm using that and I'm making good choices. And every time I make a good choice, I'm happier in here.
Yes.
And that is what matters.
Thank you, Simon. You said something beautiful, which is that if you've got this peace on the inside, then you can cope so much better with the storms of life on the outside. I wanted to ask Micah to come in. Micah, you had this really good point about learning to live without expectations has brought you a lot of peace. I wondered if you'd like to expand on that and say, how did you manage that? What could you share about how you did that?
So I come from the point of being a yoga teacher. And I think I used to live with huge expectations, a lot to do as well with wanting to get validation. And you very often are so disappointed. And so I got to a point where I was so tired with being disappointed that it started very much when you're talking about breath work, about starting to observe, about working very gently with my own body, starting to be curious about that, building strength. And then I'm not going to say that I never have expectations, but generally, for example, if there's going to be a family get together, I try to walk into it as blankly as I can and let the experience happen to me and become involved in the experience as it is, rather than having a picture of this is how I would like it to be. Because if you come to life with this idea of how you would like it to be, then you're more likely to become disappointed.
Yes.
Whereas if you can come into it more free flowing and allow it to happen, then it's more alive in a way. It's more authentic. It's more real. So yeah, that's kind of what.
Thank you. I've got something to add to that, and then I wanted to ask you another question, which is, we all have expectations, right? You can't just weed them out of your system. But if I get disappointed and I get upset with somebody, so initially I'll sit with that, but then I'll say, what can I learn about myself from the pain I've just experienced? So for me, it's that question. What can I learn about myself from the pain I'm experiencing or have just experienced? And that reflection then allows me to say, you had this expectation. Where did that come from? And then you learn something new about your conditioning influences or your past or, and so on. See what I mean? So then every bit of pain, emotional pain, becomes a starting point of a journey of learning, which then tomorrow the same trigger isn't cause the same pain, right? What do you think about that?
I completely agree. And then you're back to sitting with that discomfort, or maybe change the word discomfort to curiosity.
Yes.
I'm curious about myself. What is the lens that I am looking through? I'm looking through the lens of previous experiences, of my childhood, of my conditioning, of society. And just in a way, then things become less personal.
Yes.
Because it's not all about you. It's about a much bigger picture. I just wanted to add one thing that's really helped me is to create my own personal set of values for myself. How do I want to live? What is important to me? And I think one of the things that's been very important for me is to find I call it a gentle purpose. So I have a purpose in my life that I pursue. And I don't pursue it 100% of the time because there are other things, but I have almost like a mantra, an idea that I pursue, what is important to me.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Purpose.
I've got one more question for you. And by the way, if anyone else wants to chime in, please you raise your hand or use the raise hand bar and somewhere in this Zoom thing. But you said learning to sit with discomfort. We've been talking about that, and trusting this is not permanent is really important. So can you elaborate on that? Because sitting with discomfort is one of the key things we've been talking about how to live with peace. What do you think, Micah? How can you, what's helped you do that?
I think it takes discipline,
Mm,
and for me, I guess it's taken doing the absolute opposite for a long time,
mm,
and being really unhappy and being bored with myself and struggling and just getting to a point where I just had to shift. It had to change. But again, I would say there are, for me, yoga helped. For other people, walking in nature, drawing, writing, writing out your frustration, just page after page after page, but somehow getting the discomfort out and exploring it, addressing it, rather than, as you say, then just pushing it down, which is then the danger is that it's so painful you have to hide away from it,
yes, yes.
which leads to all the addictive behaviors then.
Yes, related to that, it's Men's Mental Health Week this week. And so many men are uncomfortable expressing emotions or not connecting with their emotions, so they suppress them, and then it turns out expresses itself as anger, which can cause all sorts of trouble in their lives. Fiona, you had your hands up. Thank you for joining us today.
That's okay. I think Sanjay had it up before me, didn't you?
That's okay. Go on.
Okay. Something Marie said. Oh, sorry, Mike. Sorry, I've had to pronounce your
Micah.
name. Sorry, Micah. Sorry. Got me to think about what was important to me. There's a lot of stuff people have said that's got resonance. Including in the chat, forgiveness of self, that really freed me. But it was values actually that was really important to me. Once I worked out so many different areas of my life, whether it was how I spent my time, who I spent it with, and what I did for a living, when I realised there was an incongruence in values. And once I started to unpick that, it was like, that's why I felt like that. That's why that was a cascade from there. And once I started to align my core values and living a life that felt more, that it meant more something to me. Obviously, it's never always in line. Obviously, we can't live in some nirvana. But as long as the majority of the time, and then the values then lead into the beliefs and a congruence, and there's like more of an inner peace now.
So
Yeah.
you said something really beautiful, which is to understand our conditioning influences and how they're shaping our lives. Not that they're wrong or bad, but just to notice them and say, does this serve me? And often they don't, you see. And if they don't serve you, you kind of let them go. But if you're not aware of them operating in the background, shaping your thoughts and actions, then they are running your life. And I think somebody said you become a prisoner of your biography, whatever that is. Sanjay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so this is just a kind of an extension of the earlier conversation around curiosity and learning from our experiences. And it just sort of brought a kind of a question to my mind, which I'd just like to share the question with everyone, which is, would you then share that? Because, we're talking a lot about ownership and responsibility here. So it's possible that you could actually sit with the discomfort or whatever it is, the unease, and then you might be able to into inverted commas, resolve it for yourself, but then not share it with the people you are in relationship with because it's no longer an issue. And so how important is it to share what you've been through and what would that conversation feel like? And I just wondered whether, people had a view on that.
Yeah, I think look, we continually use this hashtag in the world of mental health. It's okay to talk, and it's important to talk. And I think we don't do that enough, and we hang on to things internally and let them eat away at us way too much. So I think it is important to share. One of the things just right now with the large suicide prevention collaborative network we're creating called One Voice, One Hope, we recognize that many of the people in that space are dealing with really challenging information and activities on a daily basis, but they had nowhere to go to have a kind of conversation and open up. Very few of us do that, surprisingly. Psychologists have a supervision and all kinds of professional support. So we're creating something called connection cafes to allow people to open up and talk and get these feelings out and talk about the things that are really inside. So I think it's crucial. I think it's really important that we share what we're carrying.
Okay.
It's a release. I think it's a release.
You know, if you live in this space, you learn. So the beauty is that all of us who carry these questions and explore, we're always learning. And that's the spirit that I carry with me. And I think finding this peace in myself has been the greatest joy. And so life on the outside now just doesn't touch me or affect me as much negatively. I mean, you know, if you feel the joy of just being alive, you look at the sky and think, oh my goodness, how lucky we are. And you feel one with other people and nature and trees and, you know, all of that. But it all begins by realizing this piece is on the inside. It's not on the outside. And it begins with a simple question, with curiosity. What's going on? What can I learn? How can I look at myself without judgment? Can I sit with what's happening? And all these skills we talk about and help you build inside the HappierMe app, because our mission is to scale this understanding to as many people as possible. And I think if we could do that, we could reduce so much more suffering, prevent suicides, as you say, Steve, and make the world better. So thank you so much to Steve Phillip for your generosity, for coming today, and for everyone who's shared such amazing insights. So thank you. And I will, of course, share this with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj.